Needed a fresh start after a rough year, but the landlord started coming inside without permission and argued he was allowed since he owned it, so I installed surveillance, gathered evidence, and reported him right away. It started with keys. Not my keys. His. One of the spares I didn't even know he still carried. And I guess if I'm honest, that moment, that specific one, when I stepped out of the shower with only a towel draped around me and heard the groan of the front door opening, that's when something within me broke a little. As if something I couldn't piece back together again, even after it was finished. But first, I need to tell you how I ended up in that apartment, thinking I was safe, thinking I was building something true. I signed the lease alone after I broke up with Nathan. We dated 4 years, cohabitated 2. Its last half year was unbearable, so when I finally left, I felt free. I needed to have my own place, something small, me alone. I found this one-bedroom apartment in this old building plain, but it had character. Exposed brick in the living room, that type of creaky wood floors that pop at night. The landlord, Alan, was this middle-aged guy who lived 2 blocks away from me. The day I signed the lease, he was respectful, appearing too respectful, now that I reflect on it. The sort who smiles too much, lingers a little too long in silence. But I was tired, I was worn out emotionally from the breakup, and all I basically needed was peace. So I went ahead and ignored the creepy gut feeling. You always hear people say that, don't you? I knew it. And we always brush it aside. Things were fine to start. I kept to myself, worked from home, tried to recreate my routine. The apartment was a tabula rasa I could at last start writing on. Alan would stop by every now and then to collect the rent, even after I'd set up online payments. He liked cash. This would have been the first of my big red flags, but I ascribed to it old-fashioned thoughts. The visits then began getting weird. He began knocking once or twice, and when I didn't immediately open, he just used his key. The first time, I was in the kitchen with earbuds in and didn't hear the knocking until suddenly he appeared in the hallway. I jumped so violently that I dropped a glass. He apologized, stated he knocked, stated he thought maybe something was wrong with me. I waved him off. I even gave him a thanks, can you believe it? Thanks for forcing yourself into my space. That's how conditioned I was to make men feel at ease, especially. A couple of days later it occurred again, only this time I was sleeping. Middle of the afternoon, I dozed on the couch, and awakens when I heard the slamming door. Sat up, thumping heart. He was there, with a little toolbox. Told him he needed to check the heater. Said he texted, which he hadn't. I had this terrible, roiling twist in my gut. Told him he shouldn't come in unannounced anymore. Nodded. Smiled. Said, of course, absolutely. And then something I'll never be able to erase, he said, but I do technically still own the unit, you know. It's my property. Just checking everything's okay. That sentence stayed with me like a splinter. The way he said it, calm, casual, as if I were some object that was his too. I started locking the door from the inside. One of those chain locks you can only have if you're at home. I actually went so far as to go down to the hardware store and buy a little rubber wedge to put under the bottom, just in case. I told myself I was being ridiculous. He hadn't injured me. He hadn't done anything illegal. He was just strange. Nosy. But that's what they always say, right? It's not illegal until it's too late. Anyway, it only got worse. He started stopping by every Sunday morning. Always. 9 a.m., said he was doing routine checks. Told him I didn't need routine checks. Told him it was annoying me. He said it was in the lease, which it wasn't. I read the lease. There was nothing about weekly anything. I started dreading Sundays. My chest would become constricted the night before. I'd sleep in my clothes in case. I stopped having friends over because I didn't want them to see it, didn't want to have to explain to them why I was letting this man make my apartment look like the lobby of a hotel. But the real turning point, the one I can't joke about, the one that still gives me the creeps, happened on a Thursday afternoon. I'd just washed, towel wrapped around me, phone downstairs charging. I remember it was one of those sweltering days, one of those humid summer afternoons where the AC's just not doing it. I heard the front door open. No knock. No text. Nothing. Just the sound of the door opening, the echo of feet against wood. I froze. Hair still wet. My breathing halted in my throat. And then the voice of him. Calm. Too calm. Just checking in? That's what he told me. Just checking in? As if this was a bloody dorm and he was the resident advisor. I screamed. I told him to get out. I grabbed my phone, still soaked wet, and shouted that I was calling the police. He backed off, arms up in a gesture as if I was being overdramatic. Told me I was making a scene. Locked the door. Called my best friend. Then I wept. Like a deep, ugly, full-body sob. The kind that catches in your throat, and you can't even breathe correctly. Felt humiliated. Violated. Like I'd been undressed in front of somebody without even realizing it emotionally, physically, all of it. And it wasn't even the towel. It was the fear. The loss of control. The reminder that no matter how hard I worked to make something for myself, someone could still just come in and ruin it. I reported it the day after. The police were impartial, I guess. Informed me there wasn't much they could do unless I had a restraining order. Perhaps I should just go find another place, he said. As if leaving were simpler than justice. As if I were to blame. I started keeping records after that. Each time he showed up, each time I heard feet. Each note he slipped under the door, always passive-aggressive. I bought a camera, one of those motion-activated ones, and installed it to point down the hallway. I emailed him, professionally telling him he couldn't show up without 24-hour written notice. He never replied, but he avoided me for a while. And I assured myself it was over. That he'd learned his lesson. That I could go back to being a regular human. But deep inside, I never felt safe again. Not in that building. Not with those squeaky floors and that doorknob that swung open so easily. Not with being aware that someone still considered themselves in my debt. Not by any means. And to make matters worse, I still blamed myself. For not leaving earlier. For not seeing it. For being courteous when I should have yelled louder. I didn't sleep the night following that last visit, if you can even label it as that. I left every light on, and every creak of the building echoed like a threat. I sat at the door for hours, racing heart with every burst of wind that blew by the window as if it might be him. It's this very specific sort of fear to know that someone has a key to your life, and worse, believes they have the right to open it whenever they want. That kind of fear does not vanish easily. It stays in your body, in your breathing, in the part of your brain that was once home. And I believe what made it even more difficult was that this was supposed to be my safe haven. I chose that apartment as a place to recover from a breakup, from being emotionally drained, from a period in my life where I didn't own myself. I'd finally discovered a tiny corner of the world to call mine. And he continued walking right into it, like boundaries didn't exist, like my autonomy was something he could simply disregard. A couple of days after, I saw him out. I didn't mean to. I was walking home from the grocery store, trying to fit in even when my body seemed to throb with some kind of unseen fear, as if I were energized by some sort of force that none could see. He was leaning against his truck, talking to one of the other renters. Smiling. Laughing. Like nothing had happened. I don't even think he was looking for me. But when our eyes met, his smile did not fade, it just changed. It twisted into a self-satisfied one. And in that moment, I swear to you, I felt like screaming at him, there, in front of everyone. But I didn't. I stood there. Walked past him like I hadn't seen him. Like I was the guilty one. And that's when I knew, if I didn't speak up, this wasn't going to stop. He was going to continue doing this to me, to other women, to whoever ignored it. So I started talking to others. Not only my girlfriends, but coworkers, my therapist, even the barista at the coffee shop where I went every morning. I needed to say it out loud so it would quit ringing inside my head. I needed them to sit me down and tell me, that's not okay. You're not crazy. And they did. Each of them, one at a time. That's not okay. He can't just do that. You need to get out of there. But leaving wasn't simple. I still had 6 months on the lease. I couldn't afford to disobey it. And I seethed over that, seethed at the feeling of being held captive. As if I was being held captive by another man's idea of privilege. So I did something else. I wrote him a certified letter, official, on paper, chronicling all of it. Every unwanted visit. Every time he came in without an invitation. Every time he disregarded the law. I told him that if it kept up, I'd get a restraining order and sue him. I CC'd my attorney friend on the letter, even though she wasn't representing me. Just enough to make it look like I meant business. And for a bit. It worked. He shut up. No knocking. No footsteps. No more passive-aggressive post-it notes regarding tenants being too sensitive. The silence was palpable, but it was better than his presence. And slowly, I could breathe again. I avoided the apartment more. Slept a little more soundly. Carried my phone as a weapon, but at least I wasn't still clutching it in my hand. And then one night, about a month later, I came home late from a friend's birthday. The kind of night where you are light again yourself. I whistled to myself as I trudged up the stairs, with some leftover cake in a takeout container. And when I got to my door, I saw it. The lock. Scratched. Freshly scratched. As if someone had tried to use a key but simply couldn't get it to turn. As if someone didn't know I'd changed the locks 2 weeks prior. And then that cake suddenly felt like an anchor in my hands. My stomach dropped. I looked down the hallway empty. Too quiet. I just stood there frozen with shock for I don't know how long. Then I went inside, locked the new deadbolt, and sat on the floor against the door. I don't even remember crying, but I must have been, because when I woke up the next morning, my shirt was damp and my eyes hurt. That was my breaking point. I didn't care about the lease anymore. Stopped caring about the money. Called my parents, explained everything, and in a week I was packing up the essentials. Left behind couch, table, bookshelf. I built myself items that were now tainted. Submitted a proper complaint with the city's housing department. Included all the emails, photos, timestamps, screenshots from the camera. I had no idea what would happen to it, but I had to do it not for myself, but for the person who would come in afterwards. And before I knew it, I was gone. New apartment. New locks. A landlord who lives in another city, thank God. But even now, months later, I still startle at a knock on the door. I still peek through the peephole 4 times before I open it. I have a baseball bat under my bed. Because the worst part of getting your space invaded isn't necessarily that someone violated a boundary, it's that they made you question whether the boundary ever actually existed in the first place. They make you feel like you were never safe to begin with, even when you did feel safe. And it doesn't go away overnight. It clings. Follows you around. Changes how you are, the way you trust, how you move in the world. I didn't deserve that. Nobody does. But I didn't let it break me either. I told the truth. I stood up for myself even if my voice shook, even if it was ugly. And I'll keep telling this story until people stop calling it weird and start calling it what it is, a violation. You know how everybody talks about healing as if it's this smooth arc? As if there's this hill where every step gets you closer to being whole again? Yeah, it's not really like that. At least, it wasn't for me. After I got out of that apartment, I thought the worst was over. I thought getting out was the finish line. But what they don't share with you is how much trauma it leaves behind. I moved into this newer complex 3rd floor of a safe building with a buzzer entry system and hallway surveillance cameras. My new landlord didn't even live in the state. He hired a property manager to deal with everything, and in all fairness, she was the most hands-off, spreadsheet-wide type of person I've ever met. And yet I couldn't relax. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, pounding heart, sure that someone was in the house. I kept all the blinds shut, all the locks double-bolted, sometimes even bracing a chair under the doorknob as if I was expecting someone to force it in. I was always on edge, listening for sounds that didn't exist, shadows that never meant anything. I didn't even realize how rigidly I had been standing until one night in the shower. I lost hold of the soap and bent over to grab it, and I received this sharp stab all the way across my entire back. My muscles had been contracted for so long, they just froze up. That's the sort of thing you don't expect. That ache is seared into your bones. I started going to therapy again. Not the talk about your childhood type, but the type where you sit in a small room with a weighted blanket over your lap and just try to remember how to be safe in your own body. My therapist, Gina, was gentle. She didn't have me relive every last detail, she just kept asking me this one thing: where in your body are you still carrying that fear? And I didn't know what to say back then. But then it started happening. Inside my jaw, clenched up tight. Inside my breathing, always shallow. Inside my fists, always balled up like I was getting ready to fight back. Gina called it by name for me. Made me realize that when someone invades your space like that, when they use their authority to make you feel tiny, the healing isn't just emotional. It's physical. It's cellular. You have to relearn what home feels like. Not in a location, but in yourself. Still, the thing that does creep into my mind the most is how easy it had been for him. There are laws, there are renters' rights, privacy regulations. But the truth is, when you're in it, when a person standing in your hallway, uninvited, claiming ownership of the space you're paying for. You feel powerless. And part of me still clung to this guilt. For not reporting him sooner. For being polite when I should have screamed my head off. For second-guessing myself. I kept asking myself, why didn't I leave sooner? But the question that really mattered, the one I ought to have asked, was, why did he feel so entitled to remain here? So I began keeping everything in writing. Not only for the city's housing report, but for me. For clarity. For truth. I wrote down every time he visited, every time he spoke, every time I froze or deflected or blamed myself. And then, one day, I got up in the morning and sat down at my computer and made it all a letter. Not to him. To other tenants. To women. To young adults. To anyone who'd ever been too afraid to speak out. I posted it anonymously on some local tenant communities, Facebook groups, even on Reddit. I didn't mention anyone's name. I didn't need to. I just reported the story. Start to finish. What surprised me was not that people read it. What surprised me was how many people could relate to it. Messages poured in. People everywhere, telling their stories. Some worse than my own. Some eerily similar. Women telling me they felt they were crazy. People who felt they were alone. A woman told me her landlord had installed a camera in her living room without telling her. Another said she received a text from her property manager at 2 a.m. asking if she was lonely. Made me sick. But it also made me angry. Not helpless angry, clear angry. The sort of anger that is momentum. I did not want this to just have occurred to me. I wanted it to mean something. So I started talking about it. Out loud. Not just in forums, but at tenants' rights meetings, community housing meetings, even a podcast someone invited me to be on. I spoke my story not for sympathy, but for power. For prevention. For visibility. And every time I did, I felt a little less bound. A little more empowered. The thing about trauma is, it doesn't disappear when you deny it. It festers. It lurks in the quiet places. But when you say it, when you give it shape, when you name it, it no longer owns you. Not that I'm over it. I still have flashes. Sometimes I wake up and see things around me 3 times. Sometimes I hesitate before undressing, even when I know that I am alone. But I remind myself I left. I escaped. I stood up for myself, even when it was dirty and afraid and past bedtime. And I'm grateful for that. One afternoon, I got an email from the city's housing department. They were looking into my ex-landlord. It seemed I wasn't the only renter who had complained. They asked me to provide more information, more paperwork. I gave them everything. And then I closed the laptop and cried, not with fear this time, but relief. Because for the first time in a while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was making someone else feel less alone. Maybe someone would read what I had to say and get out before it got too bad. Maybe they'd change the locks sooner. Yell more loudly. Pay attention to their gut. And maybe that is what healing is. Not forgetting. Not erasing. But using your own story and building a ladder for someone else who's still stuck at the bottom of that dark one. There is this moment I always think of, and it's not the spookiest one, not even the loudest. It was after I'd left home, probably 3 months or so after. I was huddled on the floor of my new apartment, sorting through books, trying to make the bookshelves my own again, and this small paperback fell out of a box. Something that I had completely forgotten. Just a bad book that used to reside on the bedstand, dog-eared, cracked cover, pages a bit yellow from spilled old coffee. I stared at it for a second, then just lost it in tears. Not the kind you have in mind. Just sort of happened. I'm looking at books, and suddenly I'm crouched on the ground, sobbing into this battered old book. I couldn't even tell myself what was going on. But afterwards I realized it wasn't the book. It was what it represented. That little, quiet life of mine which I'd been trying to hold on to. My routines. My loneliness. My safety. The things that nobody sees but make you up. I think people don't know how much the quiet things matter. We talk a lot about a lot of big trauma, openly visible risk, but we don't talk enough about what it's like to lose your privacy from you. Your small daily liberties. Your space to just be without being watched, without having to justify or explain yourself. That's what he took from me. Not just entry into my apartment, but entry into my peace. I couldn't even start to explain to you how many times I second-guessed. How many times I stood in the middle of my living room, phone in hand, wondering if I was overreacting or blowing it out of proportion. That's what fear does. It reconfigures your instincts. Makes you question your own instincts. And the worst of it is the world loves to listen to that voice. It's just the landlord. He's just checking in. You should be grateful he's so invested. Invested. That word crawled under my skin after a while. But the thing is, I did all the right things. I set boundaries. I stood up. I tried to be polite. And he blithely crossed every boundary I set, smiling as he did so. Because he believed he could. Because the system, society, law, whatever you call it, leaves room for individuals like him. Makes excuses. Gives them room to maneuver. And women like me? We're left second-guessing in the dead of night, locking doors that don't need to be locked, apologizing for wanting to be safe. I am not doing that anymore. I am finished apologizing. I am finished shrinking. A couple weeks back, I ran into another former building tenant. In a coffee shop downtown. She saw me first. Said she'd read the post I'd posted online, the one about the landlord, the infractions. Said thanks to me. Said she'd left too. Said my post had given her the push she needed. We sat and talked for close to an hour. She told me things I wish I could unhear, not just about Alan, but about her life. Same pattern, ignored, dismissed, told to be nice. And I realized something sitting there across from her, watching the way her eyes would flash when she'd speak. We're all carrying these little cracks. Not always visible, but real. And when someone else calls them names, when someone else says, yes, that did happen to me too, it makes the weight a little less of a weight. It doesn't fix everything, but it makes you feel heard. Like you're not losing your mind after all. Like your experience matters. After that conversation, I did something small. I called up a local tenant activist organization. To volunteer, nothing heroic. Help with emails, show up at meetings, share resources. It felt good to do something with my hands, my time, that mattered. Not for revenge, I'm not interested in getting even. I'm interested in building something better. Making sure people know their rights. Making sure the next person in that situation knows they can leave, should leave, and that it's not their fault. That's how we reclaim power, not by fighting fire with fire, but by being a light in the darkness for someone else. I still have flashes when it all comes flooding back. When a maintenance guy is late and fails to text. When I hear keys in a hallway that are too close. But those moments no longer own me. They run away faster now. I breathe more deeply. I remind myself where I am, who I am, how far I have come. I listen to music. I bake something. I call a friend. I take up space. I speak up. And above all, I trust myself now. I trust the voice that says to me, this does not feel right. I trust the pause. I listen. And my new home? It is still unfolding. Slowly. There are boxes to unpack, walls to hang pictures on, reminders of the life that I once knew. But when I water the plants or light a candle or snuggle onto the couch and sleep through the movie, I can feel it. That quiet, weighty feeling of being in a place that I have chosen. A place that nobody else can get into but me. And that more than anything else feels like victory. So yeah, it started with a key I had no clue he still had. But it ends on the one I carry on my own keyring now. A little brass thing, nothing to see, but it opens my door. And no one else's. Undefined, and that's enough.